What's up guys, Tyler from Tyspeed here. Thanks for tuning in once again to our YouTube channel. Today we've got a new project for you. It's a 390,000 mile E39 M5 S62. This car gave up the ghost on its way here. We've taken the motor out of the car and gone ahead with a bunch of other side work. And we're gonna get started on the teardown so we can see what went wrong and get this thing sent out for a full rebuild. All right, so this 5-liter V8 is a naturally aspirated, high revving, dual overhead cam motor. Unlike the current M5 M6 platform that features a twin-turbo 4.4-liter V8, this naturally aspirated version, obviously as you can see, stands the test of time. I'm interested to see today, once we get cracked into this motor, what the failure point is, but that being said, the owner told us that other than basic maintenance and a couple of sets of gaskets, over time, this 390,000+ mile motor has received almost next to nothing in terms of the way of repairs in its life. I'm interested to get cracked in and see what's going on here, so let's take a look. All right, so let's get started. This is going to be a long process. One of the first things I'm going to look to do is keep good organization, so I've set up a couple of key organizers for all the parts as they've been removed. We'll do this in chronological order. I like to start from the top and work my way down to the bottom. Another thing we're going to be up against today is the overall condition of the external part of this motor. It's extremely dirty. We're going to be careful with that, but it's not a big deal at the moment because everything at the end of the day is going to be thoroughly cleaned, washed, and remachined. So we're not super concerned with contamination at this time. Basically, we're going to start at the top with the valve covers. We're going to pull the front timing covers off. We'll then rotate the motor over, pull the 2-stage oil pump and oil pan off the bottom, and get going on the internal disassembly. I'll be interested to see what parts here are worn and that need replacement, so we'll be keeping an accurate list of parts that we'll need to replace on the rebuild itself. All right, so we got the valve covers off. I'm actually quite surprised. To be honest, I've never pulled apart a motor with more than about 250 or 300,000 miles. This being almost a 400,000 mile motor, I'm actually quite impressed with the inside's condition. There's not a lot of scoring on the camshafts. They look almost brand new. At least this guy took really good care of this car, which is a nice start. I'm sure there's going to be problems with the timing chains and guides. That's a very common issue on these cars. And I'm absolutely positive that the Vanoss units are worn out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the oiling components of the camshafts here on the top. Once we get those off, we're going to move into pulling off the Vanoss units on both the left and right side, which share a lot of similarities to the E46 M3, as it's a similar generation of technology from BMW. All right, so right now what we're doing is we're taking off these Vanoss unit caps. These caps are covering the shafts that move in and out using oil pressure to advance or retard the camshaft. So right now we're pulling those off, and that's going to kind of bypass the suction that would normally be on this system, so that when we're going to pull this unit off, you'll see that the shafts that are going to be sitting on the inside of these are going to come off all the way. Otherwise, we'd be fighting against basically suction or vacuum as we go to pull this unit off the front of the cylinder head. So that's what I'm doing right now, is pulling these off, getting them out of the way. It'll make it much easier to remove. All right, so in order to remove these Vanoss units, there's a couple different ways to go about this, but being that we're not putting it immediately back together, it doesn't really matter as much. So as a result, I'm using this wrench on the camshaft here, and I'm going to be jiggling this cam back and forth to release the helical style gear that the camshaft actuates on. So I'm going to do that very delicately right now, and it's going to force this cam actuator back, and by doing that, it's going to give me enough slack to release the camshaft itself. Hopefully. It's definitely a little stiff, but again, we are fighting 390,000 miles worth of wear and tear here. The exhaust side is sticking a bit in the camshaft, so I'm actually going to just unthread this actuator from the sprocket in the cam. So this is the helical gear that was holding us up here. I can't quite get the engine rotated back far enough, but I want you to watch when this cam rotates what happens to that gear in and out. And that's basically your Vanoss actuation right there. So as that plunger moves in, the cam moves back, and as it goes out the other way, it goes the other direction. So that is basically like the physical actuation of the Vanoss unit. There we go. All right, so here's one of the Vanoss units we just pulled off the front of this motor. As you can see, this is one of the camshaft helical gears. This works in a very fancy way, but this plunger goes into the cam itself, and this helical cut gear here is what the actuator uses to spin the camshaft either in the advanced or the retarded direction. Like I mentioned before, this Vanoss unit actually runs on its own oil pump, which you can see here. I'm spinning it with my finger now. Most engines like this operate somewhere between 30 and 120 psi, but this Vanoss unit operates somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000 psi. You see that actuation is actually what physically will adjust that camshaft. So as it goes in and out, it spins that helical gear, pushes the cam in or out, and it spins that cam one way or the other. These are going to get full rebuilds as well because they also have 390,000 miles, and when they get worn out, the actuation tends to like lose its ability to adjust the camshaft appropriately. So there's seals in here that will be taken apart and rebuilding when we put this engine back together. All right, so one thing I have spotted is it looks like at one point in time in this 392,000 miles, the guy did have a new timing chain tensioner put in, probably hoping to cure some of the chain rattle that we heard coming from the front of this motor. Obviously, that wasn't going to fix his broken timing chains and guides, which we're likely to find on the inside, but a good attempt nonetheless. So once we get this pulled out, we'll be able to go ahead and remove the upper timing cover and get a good look at those timing chains and guides, which are known to fail on the S62 engine. Definitely like a fair amount of slack. Like I would probably normally be about there with the chain being new. Looking for like an explosion of some kind, you know? So as suspected, these motors are known to have timing chain and guide failure, and honestly I'm surprised that they're not worse, but you can see on the top of this guide here the Delrin plastic is broken, and basically it's starting to just come apart, and I don't have to really try hard. These things are just like fucking breaking apart. There's not a whole lot left of the plastic here. Same on this side as well. These guides are no longer attached to the backing in the rear, and the plastic is pretty brittle. It's pretty much just ready to break off, so I'm not surprised by that at all. We're going to go ahead and flip the motor over. On the bottom, we're going to start taking apart the oil pan and oil pump assembly so that we can get the lower timing cover off and reveal the rest of the guides so we can take a look at those as well. All right, now we've got this thing flipped over. I'm going to go ahead and start pulling the lower of the two sections of oil pans off, which will give us access to the remaining bolts for the timing cover in the front. Wowzers. So there's their missing timing chain guide. And honestly, I'm shocked that we only have one piece so far. So that obviously is supposed to be back up top, and it's not. I'm interested to find out what else we're going to find at the bottom of this motor as we continue to pull it apart, but this is a very complicated, unfortunately on these cars specifically, oil pump system, twin stage. There's a lot of stuff going on in here to keep this thing baffled and the oil pressure fed at all times, especially on the track. We did design this car around the Nürburgring after all. So as you can see, there's a lot of different tubes and things going on at the bottom of this oil pan pickup over here. Kind of an uncommon setup unless you're looking at a BMW Motorsport engine. A lot of these are return tubes, and they all feed the main oil pickup right here. So this is the oil pump's primary pickup, and you can see there's some vent tubes. These are all drains of oil that are going back to the pump itself. There's also a return from the rear section of the oil pan right here. All of this contributes to refilling this section of the pan as quickly as it possibly can when on track so that it can recycle the oil back through the engine. as fast as possible and avoid starvation. So kind of a unique setup on these. We're going to take our notes here as we pull this apart, because this is definitely not your common oil pump or oil pan setup. Another pretty big chunk. All right, so at this point what we're left with, I've gotten the oil pump sprocket nut off here, and we're going to be taking off the remaining 6mm Allen bolts that hold this twin stage oil pump to the bottom of the oil pan. Once this is off, we'll be able to go around the rest of the perimeter bolts here and remove the upper stage of that two-level oil pan assembly. It's a little rod that came out there. Like, how the fuck do you remember that that goes there? All right, now we got the pan off. We've exposed the innards here, so we got our crankshaft and rotating assembly, all of our connecting rods. We can see the bottoms of the pistons and everything else. Everything's looking pretty good under here. Not a big explosion to report back, which is kind of unsatisfying at the moment, but we will be getting a better look at everything as it continues to come apart. So now we're going to flip the motor back over and start working on the timing chains and guides, removing all that so we can pop the cylinder heads off. After the heads are off, we can work on disassembling the rest of the bottom end and get this thing ready to go out for the machine shop. All right, so that's that. I took some time here, and through that time lapse, got all the timing chains and guides off. I'm going to leave the intake and exhaust cam chains and stuff together while I remove the heads, just to keep things organized for now in the meantime. But we will be replacing this very long timing chain here. It's probably stretched out and elongated, as well as all the guides themselves, which are completely chipped and missing, as I suspected they would be. So these are all going to get replaced as part of this full engine overhaul. I'm actually really surprised as we continue to go along, and I know I've already said this once before, but I'm surprised there's not more wear and tear, especially for 390-something thousand miles. That's a good thing. That means that things are going to be easy for us to rebuild, to fix up, and to find parts for, hopefully. So I'm pretty pleased so far at this point with what we found. All right, next step here, and almost all the way to the bottom of this motor, we are going to be taking off the cylinder head bolts. So in order from the inside out, I'm going to be popping all these cylinder head bolts loose. They are torque to yield, so they stretch when you tighten them. They're going to be a little bit tight. As I loosen them all up, once I get to the last one, we'll be able to pop the cylinder head assembly off as a whole, and we'll have access to take a look down the cylinder bores and take a look at what the condition of this motor truly is. All right, we've got the cylinder heads off, and this block is pretty much torn down to just the rotating assembly and the block itself. I'm actually pretty disappointed we didn't find more carnage on the way apart with this thing, but I'm also pretty impressed. With 392,000 miles, you would think that this thing would be falling apart, and quite honestly, it's been in really great condition. That being said, we do have some scoring on the cylinders, so we're going to go ahead and take out a few of the pistons to get a good look at the cylinder liners themselves, as well as the piston skirt wear, we can get a good game plan of action going forward for the machine shop and what components that we'll need to be able to rebuild this motor back to better than new. As we all know, watching at home, BMWs are famous for rod bearing wear. I'll be very curious to see how these rod bearings look after all of this mileage. That being said, we do replace rod bearings on cars with sometimes 50 or 60,000 miles on it, so this is going to be the ultimate test. Definitely curious on this one. Let's see what we got here. Check that out. Considering the fact that we pull bearings out of S65s, which is the E90 V8 engine, that look like they are ready to spin in place, that is pretty impressive for 392,000 miles.
No small feat.
Oof, I lied. That was the bottom one. Spoke too soon. I was looking at the bottom bearing. There's the top one for you. That's pretty bad. Definitely in danger of starting to knock around down there, that's for sure. So I guess we did kind of catch this rebuild just in time. Oh. All right, we've got the piston out of the block and we're inspecting both the side of the liners of this piston as well as the liners of the block itself. And honestly, I gotta say, again, for the mileage, pretty low wear. There's obviously quite a bit of skirt wear. That's pretty normal on any forged piston. You can see the scraping and the marring on the side of the skirt there. There's also quite a bit of carbon buildup. That's definitely to be expected with the mileage of this engine. All the rings look to be okay. There's no damage or any sort of misalignment or wear. And if we take a look down on the block, this is a coated liner block, so unfortunately you cannot remachine this. You will see some of the gouging marks, and that just comes from wear and tear, various debris entering the cylinders over the lifespan of the motor itself, and just general operation. Some of them are actually, unfortunately, pretty thick. Basically, the rule of thumb with this kind of stuff is if you can grab your finger on any of these, that it's too much and it will eventually cause premature wear of the piston. This is honestly pretty minimal considering the mileage of this thing. I've taken apart motors that have considerably more wear with considerably less mileage. So at the end of all this, what's going to happen is we're going to have this block sent out to the machine shop. They're going to actually bore out the original liner of the cylinder itself, and they're going to be sleeving this block with cast iron liners. Not only will that last a lot longer, but it also is remachinable, so this motor can probably live on a lot longer than it did already, being the fact that it is going to be cast iron and it's going to use a new style of forged piston. So it will actually be remachinable once again. You unfortunately cannot machine these liners on these blocks because of the coating and the design. So unfortunately, once you get wear and gouge marks like this, everything's over. All right, so now with these heads off as well, I wanted to take this opportunity to show you a few different ways that a cylinder head wears out, especially after all this use. First off, we see an excessive carbon buildup in the combustion chamber itself, as well as quite a bit of sodium deposits and shit on the valves here, which we don't want to see. That being said, I want to show this valve actually removed, and you can see that the valve seat, which is this very edge of the valve, is a little bit discolored and has some rot on it. There's carbon buildup in places that it shouldn't be. This is just a worn valve. So basically, after miles and miles of slapping up and down in the valve seat itself, it's just come to wear out. You get a little bit of what's called valve guide wear here too, which is where the valve can rock back and forth slightly. A little bit of that is acceptable play, but with this amount of wear, the expectation is that we'll probably replace the valve guides themselves. I want to walk you over to what is a fully remachined cylinder head here. This is also for this fully forged S62 that we're putting together, and this is what a completely done head looks like. So there's a few parts of the process that go into this. Those heads are going to go through that as well. They're going to replace the valve guides and valve guide seals. These are all the factory valves which have been cut, soda blasted, and repolished. They've also installed new seats and cut them with a 3-angle valve job. And finally, last but not least, not only did they put the whole head through a soda blaster, but they also finished off their work with a completely redecked mating surface. As you can see, it has a beautiful finish on it. So this will create a perfect sealing surface for that new gasket as it mounts on that new block. We'll also have the block sealing surface mated as well, so that gasket will 100% seal up. This was done from Head Games in Princeton Junction, New Jersey. They're one of the best in the business. I actually really look forward to putting this motor together after seeing this thing out of the bag. Between this and that fully forged block, this next motor is sure to be a killer. All right, so check this out. Believe it or not, we've actually got a fully completed machine work S62 block here, just as we discussed, which already has brand new pressed in cast iron liners. And check this shiny stuff out, our already brand new forged piston. So just because I had this here and we were doing this teardown, I wanted to show you the differences in what we've got going on here. Basically, when they change the cylinder liner material, that requires a different shape and type of material used on the piston itself. So basically what you would use for the Alusil or Nicosil style factory block, that type of piston is a different material than the piston used for one with a cast iron liner. So this piston and these liners, these are from Back Motorsports in Philadelphia. They are specialists in sleeving BMW aluminum block motors. They've done the sleeving job on this and sold the customer the appropriate style and set of Ross pistons. So this is actually next on my list. This is going to get sent down to the machine shop and will probably be out for the better part of 2 or 3 months. All right, so that's that for the 392,000 mile M5 teardown. I've given you a little bit of an insight as to what our next project is here on tap. And so while that block is out for machine work, we'll be actually taking the opportunity to put this thing together next. This is actually going into an E39 M5 touring with a supercharger, so it's sure to be a pretty cool project. That's coming up next time on the Tyspeed YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys learned something. If you have any questions, be sure to leave me a comment or shoot me an email, tyler@tyspeed.com.